Various forms of employment have always existed in British industry. The main one has usually been direct employment, where you have a contract of employment with one employer, you're on the payroll, you're on the books, you're subject to direction by that employer. Another form is non-direct employment. So non-direct employment takes various forms: self-employment, like sole traders, but also in recent years, last few decades, we've had a big growth in false self-employment, where people are supposedly self-employed, but work primarily for one employer for quite some time. They are not on the books, they're off payroll, and they have certain advantages in terms of flexibility, but also certain disadvantages. Now, another type of employment is false self-employment through so-called umbrella companies. This is where the individual has a contract with a company, but they only work on a 0 hours basis. So they get called in to do jobs, and at the end of those jobs, the work, the payment has come to an end. Now, the big growth in the electrical contracting industry over the last few decades has been in these forms of non-direct employment. And that now constitutes probably more than 50% of total employment in the sector. And it varies between parts of the sector, parts of the country, different sorts of firms. But basically a big growth in people who are not on the books and on payroll. Now, there are certain advantages and disadvantages of this. Let me go on to some of the disadvantages, first of all, of non-direct working. And I did a report on this for the Joint Industry Board a couple of years ago. So if you're not directly employed, if you're falsely self-employed or employed by one of these sort of umbrella companies, you might have short-term advantages in terms of higher pay and more flexibility as to when you work. But if you look over a long period of time, then the pay that such people get, say over the year, over the years, over a lifetime, is less than people who are directly employed. So that's one point. A further point is in terms of non-pay benefits. Now, people who are not directly employed do not get benefits such as holiday pay, sick pay, and are usually not in pension schemes. The latter is a really, really important one, and a growingly important one, because there are a lot of people who are going to retire with not very good pension arrangements. So there's some disadvantages which we found. Another sort of set of disadvantages is in terms of performance and productivity. You might get more flexibility if you can take people on and lay them off and they're not directly on the books. But in terms of commitment, in terms of competence, in terms of knowing what the job is, you get higher productivity from people who are directly employed. By higher productivity, we mean higher levels of output per person per hour. So that's pay, benefits, productivity. From an employee point of view, there can be some advantages, as I said, in terms of flexibility, being able to work when you want to work. But we do know that there are a sort of negative effects on employee well-being from having these sorts of self-employed and temporary kind of contracts. And they relate to work satisfaction, life satisfaction, prospects for promotion at work and on the job. That then leads to another really, really important aspect of direct v non-direct employment, and that is skill formation and training. Now look, if you're not directly employed, if you're working for one of these sort of umbrella companies, one of the things you don't do is take on young apprentices. So you have more apprentice training in situations where people are directly employed. You also have more sort of ongoing promotion training where you have a long-term employment contract where the employer is prepared to invest in your skills and competencies. Now, having mentioned skills and competence, we come on to then issues like safety at work and safety of the work. There are fewer accidents in situations where people are directly employed as opposed to these other forms of non-direct employment. I think there's also evidence, which I reviewed, that the quality of buildings and the safety of buildings and the safety of work is higher where you have direct employment. All this is not to say there isn't a place for non-direct employment. There certainly is, but that should be subject to certain criteria. It should be to increase, improve, facilitate production and flexibility of production. It shouldn't be driven by a desire to avoid aspects of the tax system, because non-direct workers do not pay certain taxes, and certainly their employers don't. So if individuals enter into non-direct employment voluntarily, they know what they're doing and it's transparent, and it might just be to finish off a job, for example, then there's a real place for it. But the balance between direct and non-direct has, in recent years, decades, got out of kilter, and what it needs to be brought back. Now, one of the things that the JIB does is it very much promotes direct employment among its members. It promotes direct employment among Tier 1 big contractors. It promotes direct employment among clients, public sector and private sector. It also, in its agreement, has certain provisions for the regulation of agencies and employment businesses. There are some benefits of non-direct working, but overall the evidence is that direct employment has more positive benefits in terms of long-term pay, benefits, productivity, commitment and well-being at work. And one of the things that the JIB is doing is very strongly trying, indeed succeeding, in promoting forms of direct employment.